さて、お時間になりましたので、これより CBDC Session Highlighting Technical Aspects for CBDC Viability をテーマにパネルディスカッションを行ってまいります。まずはじめにパネリストの皆様をご紹介いたします。まずはバンクオブカナダデプティマネージングダイレクタージェームズ・チャップマン様です。続きまして日本銀行決済機構局参事役別所正樹様です。別所様、よろしくお願いいたします。拍手お願いいたします。よろしくお願いいたします。続きましてヨーロピアンセントラルバンクヘッドオブオーバーサイトクラウス・レーベル様。最後にモデレーターを務めていただきます明治大学政治経済学部教授小早川修司様です。小早川様、どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。拍手お願いいたします。さて、ここからの進行は小早川様にお任せしたいと思います。どうぞよろしくお願いします。
そうしましたら、ここから英語になります。So let me switch to English from now on. And I'd like to thank you all for joining the last session of the first day. Looking back several years ago, the concept of central bank digital currency, CBDC, was, as I recall, only a part of intellectual exercise among central bankers. They were discussing its viability over a cup of coffee as if it were the means of payment for Alice in Wonderland. But now it has come to a reality, partly driven by the Facebook's Libra project, which was launched last year. And like I said, it's not just the central banks in emerging economies, but those central banks in major economies that started their warp speed efforts to realize CBDCs. And we all know that it now exists in places like Cambodia, and the Bahamas is expected to deploy its CBDC, which is called $1, on a nationwide basis as early as October this year. And we also know that our neighboring country, China, mainland China, has also started quite extensive pilot programs in major cities with the expectation to fully implement e-yuan, electric yuan, by the time they host the Winter Olympics in 2022. So while the technology underpinning those CBDCs appears to be somewhat different, other central banks are also carefully examining the technical aspects of CBDCs, and this session highlights some thinking behind them. So what are those technical aspects they are looking into? To me, it looks at the main challenge is how to design cash-like features of CBDCs. And what I mean by cash-likeliness boils down to issues like universal accessibility, offline capabilities, and handling of privacy and anonymity. In short, as far as I'm concerned, the central banks are now examining technologies to ensure that everyone has access to CBDCs anytime, anywhere, while protecting his or her privacy. Well, with that in mind, let me first introduce three distinguished speakers from around the world. James Chapman, Deputy Managing Director of Economic and Financial Research, as well as Senior Research Director in the Funds Management and Banking Department of the Bank of Canada. James has written a number of academic papers and articles, and I think he plays a pivotal role in the Bank of Canada's initiatives in the area of FMIs and CBDCs. So welcome, James. Klaus Leiber, who is the head of the Oversight Division of the Directorate General, Market Infrastructure and Payments in the European Central Bank. We all know Klaus because he was the head of the Secretariat for the CPMI, Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructures, for a number of years. And today, I understand he will also touch on technical issues in light of the PFMI, Principles for Financial Market Infrastructures Compliance. And finally, we have Masaki Besho, who is the Associate Director General of Payment and Settlement Systems Department of the Bank of Japan. Masaki, who is my former colleague, is currently responsible for research and international affairs in the area of CBDCs and stablecoins. So the idea of this session is that first, we would like to hear from each panelist, starting from James, followed by Klaus, and then Masaki. And each speaker will speak for about 10 to 15 minutes. And after three panelists' remarks, we will start an open discussion, and perhaps there might be some questions from the floor. You're more than welcome to raise as many questions as you wish, time permitting. So with that, let me first give the floor to James. James, floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this great panel. I think I'm going to take a lot out of it. So I don't know if you can see my slides that I'm projecting right now. So in my remarks, I just want to talk about the economics behind these technical needs for a viable central bank digital currency. Since, as was mentioned, I'm head of the economic research, so I always start with research first, economic research first. Before I start, I'll say the usual disclaimer applies. So the views expressed in these slides or this presentation are solely those of the presenter and may differ from the official Bank of Canada views. Therefore, no responsibility for them should be attributed to the bank. With that out of the way, I'd just like to sort of say that, as was mentioned, the Bank of Canada has been doing a lot of research, a lot of it theoretical, for a long time around central bank digital currencies and e-money in general. Oops. So I think the key aspect of the CBDC project at the bank that has been really valuable is that there's been a lot of interaction between the economic policy and research work and the technological research work. And that's where I want to sort of, in my remarks, highlight how the key points that were mentioned about privacy and universal access, what underpins them in terms of the economic behaviors. And so for that, I'll just basically show a lot of quotes from the research that the bank has been doing in the last year with our big push to publicize it. So in terms of a central bank digital money and what makes a viable central bank money, whether it be physical cash or digital currency, it really comes down to the three economic roles of central bank money. So starting with the most important, in my opinion, which would be the unit of account. So that is to say the goods in the economy, services in the economy are denominated in central bank liabilities rather than some other good or asset. So, for example, when you on your way to this conference this morning, you bought coffee denominated in yen rather than U.S. dollars or seashells, for example. And that's important since that's the basis of monetary policy, is the control of that change of unit of account over time. And our research shows that the natural technological consideration that needs to be thought about in terms of this role is the ease of adoption and use of central bank digital money. So really, it's all about user experience and user design. Because without adoption, prices in a economy could be denominated in something else, and at that point, the dollarization of that economy removes a lot of tools from the central bank's toolkit in terms of monetary and financial stability. And the second key role is the intertemporal aspect of central bank money, that is the store value aspect. So, central bank liabilities are the risk-free store value for domestic value. Therefore, they're the foundation of the term structure of interest rates. So the central bank sets its overnight rate in terms of lending out its liabilities, and that determines the whole structure. And that's because they're risk-free. So the technological consideration that I think we're focusing on here is all about security and resilience. So central bank money, if it's not secure, not resilient, it's not risk-free anymore. It becomes risky, and that has implications for the whole financial system. And then the one that we're most familiar with is means of payment. So cash, physical cash, acts as a good option for transactions, and that supports the efficiency of payments because it curtails the market power of other means of payment in terms of charging fees to act as gatekeepers. And one of the aspects that allows central bank physical currency to have that role is its role in privacy for small transactions below the AML KYC sort of guidelines. And that's a key desire from users of payment instruments. And also, if it's going to be a viable means of payment, it needs to have a really high throughput. So that's the other technological consideration, is the throughput needed for these types of payments. So starting with some quote from research, I'll mention where to get all this research. It's all publicly available on our website. In terms of means of payment, economic research shows and focuses that payment markets are two-sided markets. So there's merchants and consumers, and there's large network effects there. And also, so that implies that to have a viable central bank digital currency, you have to find that the merchant acceptance is as important for a successful launch of a new payment instrument, such as Hyun and co-authors said this year. And in terms of technological implications for means of payment, transaction rates need to be very high. So Shaw and his co-authors in 2020 mentioned that reasonable transaction rate estimates for central bank digital currency need to be about 1,000 payments per second. For a country in Canada's side, that's about people making 2 payments per day, spread evenly over 12 hours. So it gives you an idea of what the throughput needed are. And this is as an aside, this touches back to Project Jasper, which I think I presented at this in a similar panel at a FinSum conference last year. Our Project Jasper shows that the Project Jasper blockchains that we used are viable for smaller throughputs than 1,000 payments per second. They're more about 10 payments per second, which would be reasonable for a wholesale payment system underpinning Canada, but not for a retail payment. And also, privacy is another key consideration. So Kim Hyun and his co-authors have done many surveys, and a key aspect of currency that the consumers like is privacy. So Dabhar and Aurora show that a central bank could engineer a CBDC system with higher levels of privacy than currently available commercial products, but there would be trade-offs that might raise operational risk. And in terms of operational risk, this brings us to store of value. So, for store of value, the two economic considerations we think we have to think about carefully are whether a central bank digital currency pays interest and how users interact with central bank digital currency security. So, Davul Dassani and co-authors this year in a bank paper said that an interest-bearing and universally accessible CBDC could be a very versatile interest, but that the expected benefits from them would be small and are highly unlikely. And that's sort of the reasoning that it seems like the vast majority of central bankers, when they talk about CBDC, they're talking about cash-like, not interest-bearing CBDC. Khan and Ravindran in a paper that's eminently coming out of the bank think about the security of CBDC, and that they sort of say the central bank needs to carefully consider how CBDC will be aggregated and used and what externalities will arise from it, since the idea is you would need password and other sort of security. Understanding the user experience around security is important because Minwala this year on another bank paper said security must permeate the design of a CBDC. Because the CBDC ecosystem will be a high-value target once deployed. And this brings us to another touch on DLT technology again. So in that paper, he also says permission DLT technology systems would require additional security safeguards if deployed as a CBDC solution, because public DLTs do not fit the risk profile of such an important system such as a CBDC system. So really, it's all about the security and how users interact with security. And in terms of unit of account, which I think is the least thought about and the most important, it's all about widespread adoption. And this depends on institutions such as Amarelius and co-authors in 2020 said that it really depends on the national context. So this is a joint Riksbank and Bank of Canada working paper where they look at Norway, Sweden, Canada, and understand the whether central bank digital currency how it should be used. And to Libra, I think this points to another aspect. So Diaz de los Rios and Zhu sort of talk about their monetary CBDC and monetary sovereignty paper that widespread adoption of digital currency denominated a different unit of account presents a significant threat to monetary sovereignty and financial stability. Right? And this all comes from that triangle up in the top left corner, because a unit of account is there to facilitate trade, and that facilitation of trade is what allows monetary policies changing of the supply of central bank liabilities to change the sort of terms of trade in a lot of transactions, and allows central bankers to shepherd the economy through the business cycle. But the technology implication for this is that it should be widely adopted. So, and this is sort of the worry. If you have nobody adopting central bank digital currencies or central bank liabilities, then you lose a tool in the hands of central bankers. So, Medina and his co-authors this year said CBDC should be accessible as cash, and CBDC designs should maximize inclusion and usability. That's especially important for a country like Canada, where we have a significant northern community which might not have easy access to the financial system or internet or internet connectivity. So use of something offline for offline transactions or without a smartphone would be important. And for it to be widely adopted, Shaw and co-authors sort of said this year that payments at the point of sale on online networks would require integrating with existing networks. And so again, this is all about the wide-scale adoption. And for me, this is the key point we have to think about carefully, because economic research lag behind in this area. All this research that I've mentioned in my remarks is all publicly available. And it's all on our central bank digital currency and fintech website. So I've taken a screenshot here of it. It's underneath our research tab on our website. The URL is below, and it'll give you all the about over half dozen works I think I've mentioned today, plus dozens more of research we've done, because the Bank of Canada has become very active in considering and developing a CBDC in case we feel that we need to issue one in the future, if the issuance of it is deemed necessary, even though it's not at the current point. And with that, I'll stop my remarks and hand my time back to the moderator.
Well, thank you, James, for a quite comprehensive introduction of the work done by you and your colleagues at the Bank of Canada. So we now move on to the introductory remarks by Klaus Leber. Klaus, are you there? Can I give you a floor?
Yes, if I'm unmute, I'm there. Thank you very much, Shruti. And it's an honor for me to be invited here and to follow in the footsteps of James. First, the unavoidable disclaimer: what I'm going to say is my personal view and may or may not be coincide with official views of the ECB, but of course any mistakes are my own. Again, I had the pleasure to listen to James' excellent presentation, and I could be short and just agree to everything he has said and presented. So perhaps let me be time efficient and just focus on some particular additional considerations from the point of view of the euro area. And it goes without saying that, as Chuti had indicated in his introduction, we are actually currently in a kind of perfect storm where we witness the emergence of major private sector projects, where we see the emergence of major economies attempting to shift to CBDC. And of course, we also have the fallout of COVID, which in a number of places has significantly pushed into digitization, in particular in contactless payments, as we have witnessed in the euro area. So with this background, the shift from having an academic discussion over tea to looking thoroughly and deeply into the aspects surrounding CBDC and the implications has become indeed key. And this is a multifaceted approach. There is a need to combine a look at policy aspects, multi-policy, payments policy, financial stability, the societal and economic implications, financial market aspects, and of course also the technical aspects. And if I look at this from a European perspective, of course, the situation under which you look at CBDC differs from country to country. But in the euro area, we have a particular situation which is impacting on some considerations. We have no major flaws in the provision of infrastructure services and actually undertaking quite massive upgrades, for example, in the area of instant payments recently. We also have, at least up until now, no major sign of a disappearance of cash like it is existing in some other EU countries like Sweden. And we also don't have a situation where there is a need for a significant push towards financial inclusion. However, we of course witness the developments, and we see a trend towards digitization and tokenization. We see a need to consider what is the continued relevance of a central bank. And there's also particular aspects when it comes to cross-border, which merit particular attention. So with this background, the ECB and the central banks that form together the euro system, issuing the euro as their single currency, are of course conducting analysis and experimentation in the field of CBDC for similar reasons as was explained by James. Even if there is currently not a high pressure, you need to be prepared, you need to understand, and you need to be able to react quickly if the situation would require. So to do so, across the euro system, we are engaging in internal analysis across business areas. It's actually quite encompassing, touching on basically all business areas inside the bank. We cooperate with private sector. There are initiatives such as the recent initiative by Banque de France having tendered an experiment for the use of CBDC, in particular settlement contexts, which is quite interesting in this regard. We engage in central bank cooperation, and of course, the most stellar example here on the side of the ECB is our excellent cooperation with Bank of Japan in the various iterations of Stellar. But we are also interacting with other central banks bilaterally or in the context of Basel, the CPMI, and in regional initiatives. We have just now decided to set up a regional innovation hub with centers in Frankfurt and Paris that is under the umbrella of the Basel Innovation Hub. So with this, there are some similar key considerations as the ones that were referred to by James. We are looking at key elements when it comes to CBDC. Is it a generally available means of payment, an electronic means of payment? Is it fulfilling the functions of money? In particular, from a central bank perspective, is it providing the characteristics of central bank money as in the ultimate safe settlement asset? Is it safe? Is it liquid? Is it neutral? And does it provide finality? And there's a societal dimension, as I mentioned, when it comes to privacy and data protection. So this, of course, necessitates to look at a number of core elements, in particular when it comes to the technology used, to the access, to the role of intermediaries, to compliance issues, to issues of availability, and of convertibility and remuneration. So let me look a bit at the key features with a focus on the technology side. Of course, it goes without saying that there are other crucial aspects that do play a role. And I would not like to omit the legal dimension here, with questions surrounding the legal basis, the mandate of a central bank, the legal tender status and the qualification of a digital currency, and the legal underpinning that needs to be in place to support transactions. And there are, of course, also economic aspects such as a potential disintermediation risk, which can be structural or can be particularly big in the situation of a bank run, and what could be potential measures to enhance the control over the currency more generally. Here, you can consider to deploy certain mitigating factors such as limits or tiered remuneration, which could help to support these aims. But the particular focus on the technical side, and here again I can echo a lot of what has been said by James, is about the technical robustness, the maturity of the technology, throughput, connectivity, programmability have been a key area of reflections on the side of the ECB here. Cybersecurity is a key feature which, of course, has a high degree of attention in terms of what is the robustness of any new digital form of the currency that is being deployed. And here, and Shuji already alluded to that, what is a key consideration from our perspective is that any transfer arrangement that is involved in the design of a CBDC is, in our view, like this same for private sector alternatives, a close proxy to a payment system and should adhere to the same high standards than traditional payment infrastructures here. We are conducting analysis in the context of the CPMI with IOSCO to what extent we can use existing standards and whether they can be applied as they are or whether they need some modifications or guidance to be implemented and applied towards new arrangements supporting central bank digital currency. The good news is from the preliminary reflections, there seems to be a high degree of applicability, but there are a couple of particular technical aspects that need to be looked at closely. For example, the type of ledger, whether it's distributed or centralized, whether access is permissioned or permissionless, whether transaction initiation is by the public or through a private intermediary, whether the coding is open sourced or closed sourced, whether there is a consensus mechanism involved, and whether it's centralized, whether it's decentralized, whether there are designated validators. Finality of transactions is a key role. How is it technically supported? And what are the mechanisms for exchange of value, payment versus payment, and DVP? And I expect that there will be some form of guidance as regards these issues coming out of CPMI IOSCO in the not too distant future. One last point that I want to flag is on one particular issue of importance from a European perspective, which is underpinned by the crucial role of privacy that does exist in the European perspective. And of course, there are trade-offs between privacy, between data protection, and the need for certain regulatory compliance when it comes to money laundering requirements, terrorist financing requirements. In this regard, we have recently issued a publication in the ECB which tries to square this conundrum to some degree and is looking at possibilities how to address these issues through a quite innovative mechanism which entails a crucial role for an AML authority that would be issuing what we call privacy vouchers. This is a bit following what is already existing in the area of contactless payments, where up to a certain threshold, transactions can be conducted without identification needs, whereas if you have higher values, of course, the general requirements of money laundering requirements do apply. And this is something which could be of interest to allow for a tiered model of application, allowing small value transactions, as it is now the case for cash, to be conducted with a significant degree of privacy. Again, like for James, I would like to refer you to the website of the ECB, where the various publications that I have been mentioning, from Stella to the most recent one on the anonymity, is being generally available. And I look forward to our discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Klaus, for quite an extensive introduction of what's been happening in the area. I was struck by your remarks to what extent that we could actually use the current guidance to the CBDCs in the future, because ultimately the platform which underpins the CBDCs is likely to be systemically important payment system, SIPs, in the future. So we all look forward to the further work done by the CPMI and IOSCO in the future. So thank you very much for that introduction as well. Finally, we have Masaki, who is sitting next to me. So I'll give you the floor now.
Thank you, Shuji. As other colleagues did, I first should mention disclaimers, but I don't remember the full text, but the opinions or views expressed today attributes to me, but they does not necessarily attribute to the Bank of Japan, and any possible mistakes or misunderstandings could attribute to me. And basically, what I thought on CBDC in line with the views expressed by other colleagues, Klaus and James. But today, I would like to touch upon basically 3 points. And the first point is what we, the Bank of Japan, have been doing on CBDC technologies. And the second point is what we expect for general purpose CBDC. And the third point would be technical challenges of CBDC with particular focus on offline function and interoperability. And first of all, I should mention that, and I would like to emphasize that the Bank of Japan does not have any immediate plan to issue CBDC. At this moment, in Japan, cash is still prevailing, and the necessity to introduce CBDC as an alternative to cash is not imminent. Also, the Bank of Japan commits to continue providing cash as long as the society needs it. However, technologies develop so rapidly, and the scenario where the demand for CBDC from the society could suddenly jump up, and we should be ready for it. This is our fundamental standpoint, and it has not changed. And in 2016, as Klaus mentioned, we launched Project Stella. It's a joint research project with European Central Bank to study applications of DLT solutions to a wholesale outage system. Tomorrow morning, my colleagues will present the details of Project Stella in the video session, and interested parties are very welcome to join the session. And also, at the IMES, Institute for Monetary and Economic Studies, that is our in-house think tank, we have built up institutional capacity on IT securities for decades. Our colleagues at the IMES have published a number of papers on IT securities, and the papers topics include, for example, cryptographies and authentications and verifications, biometrics, card device securities, and secure elements for devices. And during the last couple of months, we have shifted the gear for our CBDC studies. And also, the focus of our CBDC studies have further clarified. Well, now, we are primarily focusing on the general purpose CBDC, and our research projects are becoming more streamlined and integrated to see what features are necessary or expected for CBDC and how technology could support the CBDC with such features. And in this context, development of a pilot CBDC system for experimentations is now on our agenda. And to carry out the effective experiment, it is very important to specify fundamentally beforehand what we should assess. And for that purpose, we should prioritize a number of possible features expected for CBDC, which should be in line with our mandate and motivation for CBDC. And also I should like to mention that the priorities could be different from one jurisdiction to another. And talking of the BOJ's motivations for CBDC, I would like to start with talking about cash. As Klaus and James mentioned, cash is a means of payment that is accessible for anyone, accessible at any time, accessible at anywhere, safe, ensuring finality, and cheap. Central banks have been providing cash that is a means of payment with these features. And even if the society becomes further digitalized, central banks would be expected to continue providing a means of payment with such features. Private digital monies, for example, bank deposits or non-bank payment services like XXPay, can facilitate some of these features, but I think not all of them. For example, I do not see any private payment services in Japan which provides P2P payment function, which enables payments can be carried out even under blackout or disruption of telecommunication. And such money does not suffice the feature at any time and anywhere. This feature is important because in Japan, we occasionally face natural disasters. Therefore, our priority for offline function is high. And our second motivation is related to the point that cash functions as an anchor of values for a variety of private monies. Private monies, for example, bank deposit, can be converted at par against cash. This convertibility at par with central bank money underpins the confidence of various private monies. And such convertibility at par supports the safety and efficiency of the economy as a whole. If people's access to cash becomes virtually ineffective, the confidence of the private money might be at risk because the anchor of the value virtually disappears. If CBDC is designed to function as an anchor of the value for private monies, confidence of the private monies would be sustained. We think coexistence of public money and private money is very important, and CBDC could support it through convertibility. And my final point on motivations relates to the point how CBDC could contribute to the efficiency of the overall payment markets. I do not think it makes sense to evaluate the opportunities and risks narrowly focusing on CBDC. It is important to design CBDC as a component of the whole payment landscape. In this sense, what we concern now is fragmentation of our payment market. Under such fragmented market landscape, how we could enhance interoperability among different service providers is very important. To achieve that goal, of course, private initiatives could enhance interoperability. And actually, I really expect that development. However, if it is not the case, CBDC could be discussed as a tool to enhance interoperability among service providers. And now, I'd like to touch upon technologies. Earlier last month, we published a paper assessing opportunities and challenges of offline function of CBDC. As I mentioned, accessible at any time and anywhere is one of the features expected for CBDC. Therefore, we delved this issue. The main message of the report is that existing technologies seem to facilitate most of the functions that are required for offline payments, but there remain some issues. This is because offline function requires storage of value in the endpoint devices. The challenges include, for example, cost of endpoint devices, how to ensure security of endpoint devices, how to avoid double spending, and also how to implement AML and CFT. These challenges require further studies and considerations. And then, talking of interoperability, system design that supports interoperability with a variety of private monies is, I think, critical to ensure compatibility between central bank money and private monies, for the importance I have already touched upon. This function is also linked to the motivation that the CBDC could contribute to the efficiency through mitigating fragmentation of payment markets. Interoperability is, of course, achieved by the agreements between parties. However, standardization, particularly standardization of interfaces, would make it easy to form agreements because standardized interface could reduce unnecessary IT development costs for interlinking. And the Bank of Japan recognizes the importance of standardization activities, and recently we reorganized our unit responsible for the activities of ISO TC68, that is the technical committee covering financial services, which used to be governed under the IMES, but it's now transferred to and integrated to the Payment and Settlement Systems Department. And also, the interoperability related to the enhancement of the cross-border payments. This year, G20 set the enhancement of the cross-border payments as one of the top priorities, and CPMI and FSB are working on it. And last month, CPMI published a Stage 2 report of cross-border payments enhancement, and one of the 19 building blocks touches upon CBDC. I'll stop here. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Masaki, for the kind introduction. We don't have much time, but let me raise a couple of issues after hearing the stories from three participants. There are many common words among the three, but one of the things that which struck me is that the notion of privacy. I understand that our neighboring country, China, the PBOC has introduced what they call controllable anonymity, which means that PBOC has full access to all the information done by the end users, which is a very different concept from what I heard from the panelists today. James, in particular, that you talked about privacy in small payments. But in case of China, that doesn't seem to be the case, that they say, well, PBOC has full access to any amount of transactions. Given the fact that CBDC has one way or another the digital trace of all the transactions, how could we make sure to the public that the central banks would honor the privacy of those transactions, whether it's small or large amount or whatever? So I wonder if you have anything to say on that point. Secondly, Klaus mentioned the instant payment, which is closely related to Masaki's point of private initiatives and interoperability on all those things. I know that in the euro area that ECB has been quite active in providing the settlement system called the TIPS, which underpins the instant payment services provided by the platform called RT1, which is run by EBA Clearing. So here we see that the private sector is taking initiative to realize fast payment, 24/7 payments, and central banks is providing the background, the settlement layer of those transactions. The Japan as well, that we have the Zengi system, which supports 24/7 payments. So under such circumstances where the private sector has already taken initiative to realize instant payments, which provide, these super user-friendly services to end users, I wonder if, how the central banks can interact with the private sector, given the fact that they have already taken major steps towards realizing instant payments. So with that, if you have any opinions or views, please starting from James, perhaps, and then Klaus and Masaki first.
Sure. So in terms of the question about privacy, it boils down to 3 points, in my opinion. First is we have to be careful about what we're talking about when we're talking about this. Is it privacy or anonymity? I think anonymity is a much higher bar to get over in terms of small value transactions. Whereas from survey results, people, Canadian consumers value is privacy, sort of knowing that their data won't be sold, for example, to a third party or be used against them in the future. And really that comes down to the second point, which is institutional features. You mentioned the PBOC's view on this and how they're designing their CBDC. It comes down to stuff like that. It's like the trust of the central bank and trust in the institution and framework policies around how the data can be, how the transactional data for small values will be used, or really in this case, not used. And I think the third point of this, the technology side of it, is it's really hard to disentangle small value transactional privacy from, people contravening AML laws. So really then it comes down to form factor. So maybe a small value transaction could be private transactions, it could be supported by a special purpose device, for example, or some other small different form factor for a CBDC. So yeah, that's it. It's anonymity or privacy, which doesn't matter. Institutions matter though, and form factor matters.
Okay, thank you. Klaus, do you have any comments? Sorry, your mic is not on, Klaus. Okay, thank you. Yep.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, sorry, it looked off. So just to complement, the considerations around privacy are, of course, determined by the surrounding legal environment. And privacy in a European context is considered to be a basic human right. And this is, of course, impacting quite strongly on design and features that need to be deployed. And perhaps, again, since this is particular to each jurisdiction, the perspective in Europe would probably be slightly different. Some aspects of what he mentioned would be governed by data protection regimes. Privacy in the European sense is a bit closer to what he described with anonymity. Again, there are various ways how to address it structurally and technological-wise. What we have been considering as one possible option in the ECB paper is reliance on a trusted third party outside the central bank for some determinations, and of course, by not storing and passing on information related to certain low-level transactions, but there are also other mechanisms envisageable. You just need to make sure that you are serving both the demands and the expectations of users and the supporting legal framework. The second question that you have around instant payments, indeed, that is an absolute crucial aspect. And it's quite similar here to some considerations that was mentioned by my dear co-panelists around connectivity and interoperability. I think even if you have private sector solutions, to the extent that they are not of general reach, you have to ensure universal reachability. And here again, a central bank can play a role to support and foster the reachability by offering connectivity through different private sector initiatives, allowing end-to-end passing on of instant payments between all users in the economy.
Okay, thanks, Klaus. Finally, Masaki.
Yes, thank you. On privacy issue, I'd like to mention 3 points. And the first point is on anonymity. As James mentioned, the concept of anonymity and privacy are different. And I think now the expectation for the AML-CFT implementation is very, very important and increasing globally. So to me, it seems difficult for central bank as a public body to justify the creation of a new form of money that warrants full anonymity. But having said that, privacy is definitely important. And the bottom line of privacy would be central bank should be subject to the Data Protection Act of each jurisdiction. And additionally, I think it's very important to design CBDC with sufficient privacy features which makes people feel comfortable to use CBDC. Without such features, CBDC project could be difficult to succeed. And the final point, probably the most difficult point, is that there is a trade-off between AML-CFT compliance and privacy. And we should find some sweet spot to balance these two requirements. And for that purpose, I think it's very important to have an intensive dialogue with a range of stakeholders in the society. And the optimal sweet spot might be different from one jurisdiction to another. And the second point on the instant payment is because in the payment market, the network externality is very important. So interoperability is the key for the customer satisfaction as well as the business success of the operators. And in this sense, I really welcome the private initiatives which are trying to enhance interoperability among different service providers. And definitely, fast payment system that is established, developed by the Zenginkyo Japan is one of them. And looking at the history of financial industry, we have some good examples of success of alliance among different service providers. That is the alliance of ATM, automated transaction machine. And long ago, we can withdraw our deposit only at the counter or ATM machine of the bank where I have my account. But Japanese banks have expanded their alliance of ATM networks sequentially, and now I can withdraw my bank deposit virtually at anywhere in Japan. And that have significantly increased customer satisfaction, and also the banks are benefited from this alliance, and there is a win-win relationship. So in this context, I really expect further improvement of interoperability among service providers, and especially I'm much interested in how we could develop the interoperability between banks and non-banks in Japanese payment market. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I thought we had the time to take questions from the floor, but the time is running out. So let me once again thank James and Klaus for participating from overseas. I understand Canada, it's very early in the morning. Europe is early afternoon. But thanks again, and please give three panelists a big applause. And thank you very much for participating in the panel.
どうもありがとうございます。さて、以上をもちまして CBDC セッション Highlighting Technical Aspects for CBDC Viability のパネルディスカッション終了とさせていただきます。ご登壇いただきました皆様に今一度大きな拍手をお送りください。どうもありがとうございました。